These stories were raw. These were stories that have never seen the light of day because no one will allow people to speak upon this matter. The child welfare system is an industrial complex. It's a multi-billion-dollar industrial complex. And in certain circumstances, I could probably even push it to a $1 trillion industrial complex. My case was the largest case of documented federal fraud in the history of the state of Michigan. I shut down a 150-year-old institution, St. Vincent Sarah Fisher Residential Center. Of what they were doing to children in there would make your blood curdle. It was horrific. They were selling, beating, raping, whatever you can think of doing to a child they were doing. Children were dying up in there. And all they were doing is pushing it under the table because nobody wanted to talk about it. These same people are in existence. They just changed the name, moved to a different place, and they're still under operations. Look at it this way. We could, as a society, help, let's just say, a family, whatever the situation is, you know, they're having challenges. We could help them out with $500 a month, or we can take their 2 children and bill at almost $5,000 a month per child. The federal funding stream spigots open and money comes flowing down like you wouldn't believe. So the level of fraud we're talking about billions per state. So now we have taken that to another level of basically antitrust violations. There is no competition in child welfare services. The system is designed for the acquisition of goods. Children had always been considered as chattel. People look at the Constitution and say children are not included in it, but actually they are. It's called posterity. The posterity of a nation, the future. That's where the laws of perpetuity kick in. The laws of perpetuity are applied to property. That property of the chattel, of being a movable good, it's not the child itself, it is the birth certificate, the title of the good. Because who is ever in possession of that title has the rights to benefit from the future perpetuities of that good. It is at that time that it is an admission of guilt for failure to provide for the necessary means of the child. That is a legal codification of poverty, which is a crime, and the crime is called abuse and neglect. If the parent cannot provide, the state will intervene. And upon that intervention, the parent has, or the original guardian has no rights to challenge. The only rights would be the rights under property law. That's how our nation was built. It was built upon the backs of the weak, the tired, the old, the infirm. It is the oldest model to rebuild a society. In regards to the child welfare system and the money, everyone says, oh, we shouldn't have entitlements. We shouldn't assist people who are in need no matter what the situation is. But people fail to understand that this is a whole propaganda campaign. It's because people don't grow up wanting to be poor. The state is coming in and intervening and removing the children, but what people don't understand is it's under what I call the iron curtain of secrecy. You cannot look at this, you cannot audit it. The only thing that we know are the propaganda campaigns that come out. They have a little TV picture of a little child crying because they've been hit. That's not what the real story is. There are anomalies or unique cases that happen that are extremely tragic, that do deserve intervention of the system, but the way that we systematically harvest youth has got to stop. These child placement agencies then in turn are receiving taxpayer money to put on big advertising campaigns during the month of April which is Child Abuse Prevention Month. You have Foster Parent Month in May. You have Adoption Month in May. And if you look statistically, and I look at court systems, how much money, you can see a pattern. Whenever these months, you have spikes of the number of children who go into the child welfare systems. A child can be taken from a parent because of lack of medical coverage, because the state will only cover in instances of mental health, and the numbers statistically get crunched, sent up through SACWIS, get pumped out to show, look at all these neglected children. No, they're not neglected. The parents just didn't qualify for health insurance. But what people don't understand is, if you're saying that you're poor and I shouldn't help you get back on your feet, I'm going to take your child. Let's talk about the money. Once that child is put under the auspices of the state and what most people know as foster care, because Child Protective Services is the enforcement that acquires the good, removes that child, and the legal properties of that child, being the birth certificate eventually, and puts it as a ward of the court or a ward of the state. That is a judicial determination, at which point the federal funding stream spigots open and money comes flowing down like you wouldn't believe. The state attorney general cannot go after Medicaid fraud and child welfare because the state attorney general is the one who prosecutes child welfare and is also the one who defends the contractual relationships of the child placement agencies. So you have an inherent conflict of interest where not one state attorney general has gone after Medicaid fraud and child welfare. They were running double cases, phantom cases. They would take it's called the Will Smith, Bill Smith syndrome, where you have Will Smith with this social security number, you cut and paste, flip it over here into juvenile justice, you change Will to Bill. And now the same social security number, but they're called double jackets, so nobody knows what's going on. How is an individual supposed to receive due process in a court when the judge is going to rule in favor of that child placement agency of which they sit on the board and of which they receive financial contributions to their re-election campaigns? Giving them a few little trinkets of assistance to make life stable to go forth. But instead of doing that, we prefer to drop approximately $300,000 a year on one child who is in a residential facility on the highest level of medications classified as special needs under mental health. These youth end up no education because they've been transferred to home to home to home. They've never had a stable education, so they don't acquire high school diplomas. They can't learn. They've been, the sexual abuses that go on during their whole time, they've been under the auspices of the state are horrific. The state will not report them. I have consistently argued that we do not base our prison bed population on fourth grade MEP scores. We base them on our foster care population because the prison system is an industry also which is included within the child welfare system. We do not calculate that. We used to count our youth, even from the beginning of the time, we used to count our youth as future soldiers. You can go back to any society, the Greeks, the Romans, they would always count. We count our youth based upon the prison system because it is a multi-billion-dollar industrial complex which falls under child welfare. Child welfare, just to let you know as an example how powerful this segment is, when they did the raids down in Waco, Texas years ago, when Janet Reno was in charge, the way they got authority to raid those camps was under child welfare in the best interest of the children. It was an exigent circumstance. Therefore, all rules are thrown out the window. You can do whatever you want. How can we stop this? How can we make sure that we have in the future an educated, productive workforce? Innovative, creative talent so that we don't have to import our intellectual resources. Looking at the system as it stands, the money the violence, the destruction of childhood, what really goes on in the system. Back in the 80s, there was a case out of New York, and it's called the Dinner Court Settlement with the city of New York, because New York was engaging in contractual fraud in these child welfare programs. So now we have taken that to another level of basically antitrust violations. There is no competition in child welfare services. Basically, you have the establishment of a few agencies, or whatever you want to call it. There is no competition of prices. They set their prices. They will tell you how much. These people come together at tables, and they bid on cases. Who's going to get which child's going to pay the most money. And then they go with these lists and they go pick them up. Because there's no competition, there's inflation on the prices, which is hurting the taxpayer. We have to pay for their enjoyment of destroying a childhood. That's something we need to question desperately. There needs to be some accountability. The fault lies upon the administrators of the federal and state programs. These administrators have been there from day one and refuse to leave the helm. This is one of the reasons why I decided it's time I stood up. We don't sell human beings anymore. We give tax incentives. And that's exactly what the adoption subsidies are. So who's going to hold the state accountable for abuse and neglect? Who's going to hold the state accountable for failing to provide for the necessary needs of the child? Who's going to prosecute the state for children who have died?